Okay, that was the Doobie Brothers, by the way. 1982, listen to the music. Anyway, bore da, croeso. Welcome to the Inspire stage. This is the second day, of course, of Wales Tech Week 2025, and it's brought to you, of course, by Technology Connected and other partners. Now, our first session of the day is entitled The Entrepreneur Playbook in Practice, Founders and Funders Share What Works. And this session is in partnership, of course, with British Business Bank and the Development Bank of Wales. And we look at what truly drives business success. Now, just for you to be aware, it is being recorded, well, at least the panel is being recorded, and there will be a chance to ask some questions towards the end of the session. So we aim to come to an end about 11 o'clock-ish, so the chair will take some questions maybe 5-10 minutes before that. So please don't be shy, raise your hand anytime. So chairing the panel is Bethan Bannister. She is the Senior Investor Manager at British Business Bank. She sits within the Nations and Regions Investment Funds team, and she oversees the investment fund for Wales. So without further ado, please don't be shy with your questions later on. Please welcome the panelists and Bethan, our chair. Bethan.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone. Really good to see you today. Hope you weren't too badly affected by the terrible traffic this morning, but really nice to see many of you in the room today. So as Chris says, this panel is very much focused on getting the top tips from the funders and the founders who've gone through that journey of fundraising to scale their businesses. So they'll be sharing their top tips with you today, and hopefully it'll be a really interesting session. Please engage if you do have questions. I will be coming to the audience later, so make the most of the opportunity to ask questions if you have any. So as Chris says, we'll be giving you guidance on navigating the funding landscape and navigating that fundraising journey, and also really looking into how you can thrive post-investment. So those are the key areas that we'll be looking at today. So we've got a brilliant panel, really great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. If I could come to each of you to introduce yourselves, if that's okay. Ash, can we start with you, please?
That's great, yeah. Hi, great to be here, guys. So my name is Ashley Rogers. I'm an investment manager at Foresight Group. We're a FTSE 250 investment manager. We lead the equity investment proportion of the investment fund for Wales, which is predominantly what I do. We invest in growing businesses across Wales with checks from about 250k up to 5 million.
And Duncan?
Good morning, my name's Duncan Gray. I work for the Development Bank of Wales. My role there is I head up the team that invests in early stage technology businesses, startups through to Series A and beyond.
Nick?
Hi, I'm Nick Ray. It's working? Yeah. And I suppose you call me a recovering serial tech entrepreneur. I spent 30 years doing it. I've run 4 different businesses, exited 4 different businesses across cyber, AI, enterprise, SaaS, and a couple of others that I can't even remember. And I now do what old farts do, which is act as chair, NED, advisor to young thrusting entrepreneurs.
Brilliant, thank you. Fran?
Hi, I'm Fran. I'm founder and CEO of a company called Grace & Green. We're essentially an ethical and sustainable period care and also a bladder support care brand now, based in Bristol, but we do a lot of work in Wales. We have a fulfillment centre here. We primarily supply period provisions to lots of corporates and workplaces, educational institutions, but also do a lot of work with the government in supporting period poverty action plans.
Brilliant, thank you all, brilliant. So we're going to start with talking about the purpose of fundraising and why it's important to have a clear strategy for fundraising before you go out to the market to raise. So Ash, if I can start with you, why do you feel it's important for founders to have a clear fundraising plan and strategy before they approach you as investors?
Yeah, I mean, having clarity on your narrative is absolutely fundamental before you approach any investor. And the key reason is, depending on the narrative and your purpose will depend on how an investor approaches you in order to evaluate you as an opportunity. So I think there are a couple of really key questions that you need to ask yourself before you go to the market. I think first you need to ask why. So why you, why now, why this market, and why your particular solution. Second is how. So how much are you raising, and how are you going to spend the money? What are you going to do with the capital? What is the purpose? And then thirdly, and I think this is quite a neglected area, is, what are the key KPIs and achievements that you're looking to achieve with the capital that determines what good looks like, what does success look like after you've raised? And that is fundamentally important, particularly if you're anticipating subsequent funding rounds, to understand what you plan to achieve and what your milestones are, because it allows you to determine what you need to achieve to justify that valuation before you hit your subsequent round, and that obviously impacts dilution as an individual.
Brilliant, thank you. And you touched there upon how much to raise. Nick, I'll come to you because you've raised a number of times for your different entities. How does a founder know how much to raise, and do founders typically ask for too much or too little, in your view?
I think the glib answer is you can't raise too much money. So actually, you need to be ambitious, I think, about what you raise. And if I look at startup companies that I've been involved in more recently, many of them just don't raise enough. They have an over-optimistic view of how long it will take to build a product, how long it will take to get to market. The reality is it always takes longer than you think, even when you take this rule into account. So I think the important thing is to think about stages of funding and to think about what am I going to do with this particular round of money? What will be the end goal for this round? And I see too many companies that try and do one round of funding, give me $500,000, I'm going to build a business, it'll be cash flow break even. In tech, that is rarely the case. So I think you've got to be ambitious about what you raise, and I think, to be honest, it takes you no longer to raise $1 million than it does to raise $500,000. And the dilution is probably the same, irrespective of what you're doing. You just need to have an ambition and be able to articulate that and to be able to show that you can create value that justifies that investment.
And Duncan, what's your view? You meet many founders every week. Do they tend to have that clear purpose and clear strategy when they're raising?
It varies enormously. I'll be honest, I have read 40-page business plans, and genuinely at the end, I cannot definitively say what the business does. I can have a good guess at it, and I can sort of put it in my own words, but I've read quite a large document, and I don't know what it does. The better ones, yes, you have a clear idea. A concise pitch deck which positions what you're looking for and why is valuable. The two questions I always have when I start reading a business plan to help me understand it is, what is the problem that you're solving? Not the technology. What is the problem that the person who's going to pay for it has that you are solving? That needs to come out right at the beginning, as if you were explaining it to someone in the street. So, no technical terms, just in very simple, high-level terms, what's the problem you're solving? Once you've got a handle on that, everything else makes sense. Because, if you're developing a cure for cancer, clearly the market is large. You don't have to persuade me from that, but there's going to be a lot of drug trials, and I'll expect that. If you are improving efficiency of Ethernet communications, I can have a different set of questions in my head. So getting that out up front is really important. And a lot of people don't. A lot of people, these are your businesses, they're your babies, your children. You tend to sort of get immersed in the detail. You need to pull yourself out and just present it simply.
Thank you. And Fran, you raised funding from Duncan's team recently. Tell us a little bit about that round and why you were looking to raise finance at that time.
Yeah, I wish I'd listened to Nick, actually, about 2 years ago after hearing that piece of advice, because I think you do need to raise so much more money than you realise, and also the length of time that it actually takes to get that money in. By the time you've closed, you're kind of, wow, we should have really doubled that round because of what you could have achieved with it. But in the round that I closed recently with DBW, we raised, it was a many different people involved. DevBank was one of the lead investors. We raised 1.5 million. up until that point, we had raised small amounts of money via like angel investors, very small amounts that took us from one year to the next. And it's the sheer amount of time that you're outside of the business working on the investment raise that causes a huge amount of problems, in the sense that you're not scaling at the rate that you should be. And also you're abandoning your team a little bit, looking at sort of raising money and scrabbling around trying to find it. But I think what's really key about this particular raise, because it was a large amount, it was about a clear objectives and KPIs and deliverables of what we wanted. And we were actually looking for partners as opposed to capital. And I think that's really key, that we were looking really at a very targeted view on the types of investors that we needed.
Thank you. And I'll stay with you for a moment, if that's okay, Fran. So let's move on to talk about the types of funding available and the types of investors that you could approach. How did you navigate that confusing landscape? How did the ecosystem support you to find the right type of funding for your business?
It is really tricky, because there isn't, a playbook, as you say. When I first started, you're kind of navigating quite a confusing area of where you find investment and who it is that you need to be approaching. And I think recently again, going back to being targeted, you're looking at the types of investors that align with your values. We are heavily involved in sustainability and ESG, so that was, a priority for us. And I think when you match it with the types of investors and you do your own due diligence as well, which is really, really important. People always forget that you can also, do due diligence on your own investors as well. It just takes a lot less time, and you're ending up with investors that are truly aligned with your purpose and really kind of, moving the company forward in the right way.
Thank you. Let's take a step back, Duncan, if you don't mind touching upon the types of funding available. I know DevBank has various different pots, but could you just talk about the funding that's relevant for scaling tech SMEs in Wales, please?
Yeah, in some ways, there is a playbook as of today. There's a playbook on our website for founders, which will attempt to guide you through some of this. And sorry, Fran, we shouldn't have written it a while ago, so it would have helped you when you were raising. But that's there, not to tell people what to do. It's a relatively conversational piece. It's not a textbook, and it tries to sort of guide people through some of the questions that they have, and give some guidance. We as a team are happy to do the same. If you approach us for funding, you should absolutely have everything that Ash says. If you've got a question and you want to grab us now and say, look, how does this work? Happy to spend 10, 15 minutes talking it through and giving you a high-level sort of gut feeling as to where you are. For early-stage technology businesses, it's relatively straightforward. You're probably going to have to raise equity. I would suggest that anyone raising money starts from the point of view of, I need to raise money, how much do I need, what am I going to do for it? Once you've done that, the answer of, is it debt, is it equity, is it a CLN, is it something more exotic, will actually become quite clear. And for most early stage technology businesses, it is equity. The reason for that is, if you take out debt, you've got to pay interest, you've got to service the loan, you've got to repay it. Most technology businesses don't have the revenue to do that. It's the wrong sort of funding for them. What you want is an equity partner who will invest, become a co-owner in the business and help you deliver what you're doing.
Thank you. Nick, I'll come to you next, if that's okay. So how did you navigate this landscape? And I guess each investor would have different expectations. How would you deal with that?
Well, I'm not sure I necessarily navigated it that well first time round, but you do learn over time. And I think the important thing is to think about your funding in stages and to think about what is the purpose of this particular round, what will I have achieved at the end of this round. And it normally, if it's early rounds, it's not an exit, it's simply some new value point. I think you need to understand which investors are right for you. So if you've got an investor that invests at Series A and you're trying to raise seed, they're not going to invest, right? Because they will want more. I think you need to think in terms of raising enough money for 2 years. So I think once the investment is closed, you should have 2 years runway. In practice, that means that you will be going out and doing your next raise sooner than that, because you'll want to close your next round within 18 months of closing your first round if you've got 2 years' money. I think it's helpful to think, as a rule of thumb, that each round should be valued at about 3 times the price of the last round. So each round you should be multiplying the value by about 3. You're probably going to give away about 20% at each round. So if you want to think through a long-term funding journey, it's good to kind of map that out and get a feel for what that looks like. And then say, right, okay, if that's what the end point is, what's the value proposition? Well, how much value will I need to have created for that journey to make sense? So that's my advice.
Okay. And you talk about finding the right fit. This isn't just about the founder seeking the right investor. Ash, I'll come to you on this if that's okay. So what about this relationship between investor and founder? I don't know if you know, but apparently the investor-founder relationship lasts longer than the typical UK marriage. So it's a really important relationship. Talk to us about what makes for a good relationship between you as an investor and the founder.
It's both a fascinating and terrifying stat at the same time. I mean, clearly to get a transaction done, you need to have alignment on all the deal dynamics, so valuation structure, et cetera, and the legals. But alignment beyond that is just as important, and there's a couple of key things to think about. So firstly, risk appetite of the investor versus what you're trying to achieve. A US growth investor is going to have a very different risk appetite than a traditional UK private equity investor. And having buy-in to the strategy and the growth and what you're trying to achieve is really important. Alignment in terms of exit horizon. If you're a founder that wants to grow a business and it's going to be a lifestyle business, that's going to cut out quite a few different investors who are looking for a 3 to 5 year time horizon. And then beyond that, I think it's, what do you want to achieve out of your investor as much as what your investor wants to achieve out of you? So, for instance, is it someone with a particular connection to a sector that you want to open up that type of black book from? Is it someone who has experience, expanding into international markets or has particular portfolio companies that could be interesting to you? As Fran said, doing your due diligence on your investor is just as important as your investor doing due diligence on you. And believe me, we will do due diligence, and it's pretty brutal. So, throw that stick back. So having that alignment, just beyond deal dynamics, everyone thinks about top-line valuation, but think about the broader things outside of just that deal that's in front of you.
Brilliant, thank you, Ash. Let's move on to talk a little bit about investor readiness and how founders can make sure they're prepared for their raise. So Fran, I'll come to you first if that's okay. What would your top tip be for founders to make sure that they are investor ready, just reflecting on the raise that you've recently had?
I think it's making sure that you have that deck, like as long as you don't want to have a 40-page business plan, you want a really short, sharp deck that really grabs people's attention, because they're not going to be reading lots of, they get thousands, I would say, wouldn't you? And I think you also need to be really, really clear on those objectives. Like, what are the things that you're actually going to be doing with that capital? There's so much due diligence actually that happens behind the scenes, and I think it's just setting up that data room. So making sure that you've got proper contracts in place, looking at your insurance policies. It's all the stuff that you probably don't have time for, but it's actually really crucial. So I would say, again, this playbook I think is going to be really helpful, because that's something that I didn't have actually at the beginning, and then you get a whole list of things that are requirements, and just making sure that you're collecting lots of that data, making sure that you're minuting your board meetings, that kind of stuff. It's really, really important.
So it's about the governance as well, so the governance of the business. Yeah. Okay. And Duncan, just wondering about all the applications you see. What are the areas that often need a bit more work? What are the pitfalls, really, of preparing for investment?
I mean, a lot of the pitch decks we go, assume I understand what the business does and why someone would want to pay for it. Just being clear about, how much money you're raising, what are you going to use it for, if you've got thoughts on valuation or if you haven't. I mean, as Ash says, it is a partnership. I think a lot of people approach it as a slightly gladiatorial experience. I'm selling my equity, you're buying my equity. It's not a customer relationship. VCs, we don't sit there in the evening twirling our moustaches and wondering how we can get one over the founders. Genuinely, it is a partnership. The legals, the valuation, these things are important. There is a balance of, I don't want to say power, but there's a balance of legals, and we've seen lots of situations where some of the legal requirements become quite important, and actually some of the founders then say, actually we can see it because he's leaving, I'm staying, and I'm glad that I'm sort of aligned with you. But it is a partnership. We try to be fair, we try to be reasonable. If you're open and honest with us, it's so much easier. We have a portfolio company who had an issue, and they did confess that they'd kind of hidden it from us. And we had to say, if you told us when we were doing the funding round, we could have addressed it. And we'd have done exactly what you're trying to do now, but we'd have done it in a position where we could go to the other party and say, there's a check here. Do you want it or not? And if you do, there's a condition attached to it. Once the money's gone in, the founders wanted something to happen and all the leverage had gone. We couldn't address it because they'd hidden it and they didn't get the outcome they wanted. Not because it was right or wrong, they just didn't have the position to do it. So as investors, we've seen a lot of things. There's not much that scares us apart from a surprise. A partnership, if you've got a problem, our reaction is always, how can we help address it? Not anything else. So, please be open with us about what you know, what you don't know, and we'll work with you to try and fill in the blanks.
Thank you. And Ash, what's your perspective on what is investor ready for you? What are the basics that need to be achieved?
I mean, clearly you've got the obvious common sense things of having a model, having a forecast, having a vision of what you want to achieve and how you're going to achieve it, and a pitch deck and your standard sort of financial and legal document hygiene and having that data room ready. But I think it comes back to the fundamental point of if someone's paying you to solve a problem, that validates two things. Firstly, that it's a problem that's bad enough for someone to pay you to solve it, and secondly, it's that your solution is good enough to solve that problem. And so evidencing and having preparation of, evidencing the commercial traction and customer validation of your proposition is really important. So validating your pipeline, customer feedback, contracts, breakdowns of revenue by your customer, and how that progresses and feeds through to the forecast that you're presenting, I think is really important.
Brilliant, thank you. Just conscious of time, I'm going to move on to the fourth topic, which is around investor benefits and how value add the investor can bring beyond the funding, beyond the capital. Fran, I just want to come to you first, actually, to talk about this equity aversion topic. How did you overcome that feeling that you were going to lose control if you were to have an equity investor as part of your business?
Yeah, everyone is terrified by it, and I completely relate, particularly at the beginning. But I think going back to Duncan's point about partnerships, you've got to see the investors as a complete partner, and you're getting so much wisdom and presenting not only just the opportunities but also your challenges. They've seen it a million times before, and you're just seeing it for the first time. So, board meetings should be there to also talk about the exciting bits and the opportunities, but also be honest and just be like, look, I'm finding this really tough, or I don't know how to navigate this, because part of their role is also to come in and help support you in that way. I think we've got a patchwork of different types of equity. So we've got obviously institutional funding from Dev Bank and FSC, but also from angels. Angels are also fantastic. They're your advocates, and they're the ones that are going to go out into the world and be your little brand ambassadors. So just use them and lean on them when you need them.
Just staying with you for a moment, can you give us some examples of the value add that your investors are bringing to your business at the moment?
Right now, for example, we've obviously got the investment in and we're scaling. I would say one of our biggest challenges, as I was telling Nick this morning, is actually restructuring. So it's making sure that you've got the right people at the right roles. And that can be really tricky because you're navigating the next phase of growth, and you've got this great team that have carried you through when it was super scrappy and a bit disorganized. So it's kind of making sure that everybody's on side, but also looking at a whole new recruitment plan. And that's quite tricky. But the board's been fantastic with that.
Brilliant, thank you. And Nick, you've moved from being a seasoned entrepreneur, seasoned founder, to now taking more of an NED and chair position and helping scaling businesses. What value do you bring, not you personally, but what value do NEDs and chairs bring to founders?
Yeah, so I think founders get a bit scared about appointing a chair because they think it's going to be bringing their dad onto the board and their dad's going to tell them what to do. And that's not really what chairs do. So I think the chair is more like a trusted uncle, and it's somebody that you will share your concerns with. I think being a CEO can be a very lonely job, and actually having somebody that you trust, somebody that will give you good advice, good counsel, actually is a really supportive thing for founders. And I think people sometimes confuse what they want from a chair and what they want from a NED. So my perspective on it is, if you find somebody with great industry expertise that you think is relevant, or somebody with great contacts that you think are relevant, you might want to bring them on as an advisor. Don't have to be on the board. You might want to bring them on as a non-exec director, but those values don't necessarily make for the right chair. The chair is a slightly different role. It's a more involved role. They're going to be involved in strategy. They're going to be developing the business with you, and they're going to be counsel. So that's really, I think, where you sit. And I took the decision in my first business to bring on a non-exec because basically I hadn't run a software company before, and I wanted somebody who had actually done it, and who'd done it twice before. And it was a transformational experience for me. You know, I just learned so much more, and still made lots of mistakes, but I avoided a lot that I would otherwise have made. So I think that's where the value is.
Thank you. And Duncan, do you typically appoint an NED or chair when you make an investment?
Probably not, actually. And if I'm honest, I think we should do it more. So don't come to me and say, well, you said you wouldn't appoint one. That's not what I'm saying. I think we should, because I think the value is exactly what Nick says. Having someone who can help you find the answers. We were sort of chatting about sort of chairs beforehand, and I said, you know, I would always take a chair who knows none of the answers, but all of the questions, because that's their role. You know, when you've got a problem, they're not supposed to reach out and say, there you go, there's the answer, go and do it. They're supposed to say, well, here are the steps, here are the questions that will take you to the answer. But it's up to the executive management to find that, and above all, to execute it. So we don't always appoint. We would always expect the board to have the right balance of skills. If there's a chair in place and the board has everything it needs, absolutely fine. We're not going to sort of appoint someone for the sake of it. As time goes on, often what the business needs will change, and you might then say, actually, we now need an investor director that we will appoint who has, you know, more financial skills, or, you know, if you're starting to sell, has the sales skill to help and support you in doing that. And if in 2 years' time that set of skills isn't needed, you change the investor director. You know, you change the composition of the board to suit. You know, business isn't static; it's dynamic. And the board needs to respond to that. And the NEDs and the chair are things that you can and should change. And the better NEDs and chair, you know, someone says to me, you know, how does the chair feel when you go up and say, look, actually, we're going to change it? The best chairs actually come to me and say, look, I'm not the right person for this anymore. I'm better in a scrappy, small startup. Now you need someone who's ready for sort of Series A to B. And that's not me. I don't enjoy it. It's not what I'm good at. Find someone else to do that. So yes, we should do it more, because they are hugely beneficial to founders and great value.
I shall come to you for one final question. How do you, as Foresight, add value beyond the capital?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that we add value continuously throughout the journey and throughout this partnership. I think perhaps, obviously there's the standard answer of being able to build the foundation of the business and good governance and all that typical stuff that comes with having a private equity investor on board. But beyond that, I can give some real life examples. So we have a portfolio of over 200 businesses. There are not many problems that you can have which at least one of those businesses would have faced at some point. So the cross-pollination of businesses is really, really powerful and something that founders really value. So for example, we completed a £2.5 million growth investment into a business called Bloom Technic back in October. Fantastic business in the agri-tech space, a hardware business at heart, developing some really, really powerful software. But they're not software guys, right? And they wanted to hire a specialist software to come into the business to help them build this tool. And they were finding it difficult to interview the right people, trying to get the right skills. So we brought on board and will bring on board one of the chairs of our B2B SaaS businesses to help them with that interview process. And that was incredibly value add, I'd like to think, for them. On top of that as well, there's access to investor partner grant programs. So we were able to secure an additional 350k of non-dilutive funding to them alongside our investment. So it's various things like that. And clearly you've got a network of 60 investors, each of which have their own network. So being able to connect them with the right people, if you're looking to hire a ops director in a certain sector or a chair, for instance, having that black book can be very powerful.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions from the room. Is there anything anybody wants to ask anyone on the panel? Yeah, there's a question there. Yes, the mic's coming if you need it.
Yeah, so my background is I've exited two IT businesses, and that's included venture capital rounds. And what's really shocked me as I've come out of that is the number of people in Wales with fantastic ideas that want to get started, and the lack of very early stage help for them to just get their feet on the ground. So it's particularly a question for, I guess, DevBank Wales and the British Business Bank. Is that very early seed stage, what specifically are you doing to help very early stage businesses to kind of get going?
Okay, thank you. Duncan, do you want to touch upon that?
You don't want to answer it first. My heart sunk when you said shocked. I thought, oh, here we go. It's difficult, is the honest answer. When Fran started her business, by the time we became involved, she was beyond, I suspect, the stage that you're talking about. And I think we struggle to support businesses that early when it is just an idea. Partly because our ability to have an impact is quite small. Partly it's quite hard to spot those businesses that have real potential and are going to deliver it, and those that won't, because there are a lot of people with ideas and dreams which won't come to fruition. So it's a very difficult sector to invest in, and a lot of people don't across the UK. So I think it's not a problem for Wales per se. I suspect a lot of people use credit cards, personal finance, friends and family to get to the point where they can demonstrate that it is more than a dream. And I think that's the challenge you've got to overcome. Is it a dream or is it a deliverable idea? We have backed some very early stage businesses. SpaceForge, which has gone a long way and raised a lot of money since. When we backed that, it wasn't much more than an idea. But I'll be honest, we don't invest in a huge number of businesses that early. Most investors don't. How best to support it? I think it's the Welsh ecosystem, businesses like FinTech Wales and the programs they work, Medi Wales, the events at Tramshed and the likes. There is support and advice out there, and the new Playbook is definitely something that should feed into that, along with everything else. But in terms of hard cash, it's hard to do. The corollary, I guess, is I think the funding needs of those businesses are relatively small. You're not. If you're going out saying I need $1 million to sit in my back bedroom and come in a business plan, you're dreaming. That's not going to happen. So what I would say is try to get some points that prove that what you've got is real, and find a way to do that cost effectively. but I absolutely appreciate it's a challenge.
And if I can just add, just to plug my colleagues in the room, the startup loan is also an option. So the startup loan can support pre-revenue businesses, and you can have up to 25,000 per director. So that's something to consider if you just need a little bit of money to get you going, get a prototype or whatever. My colleagues are at the front here, so if you do want to find out more, do reach out. There was another question. Ray, did you have something?
Hi, it's a question about openness and kind of partnership. I'd be interested in how Fran's view, as well as kind of the investors' view on this, is how open should you be with your investors about the problems in your business when they invest? So, for example, if you've got a tech business and you've got some software that kind of doesn't scale yet, kind of how open should you be with that? You presumably have lots of thoughts and fears about kind of things going wrong, and you don't want to share all of them. But how much should you share? And I'd be interested in the investors, how much do you want to share in kind of opening that partnership up?
Fran, what's your view on that?
I think given the level of due diligence that happens, you have to be really honest and open. When we approached Dev Bank of Wales, for example, we had 2 pieces of IP. We had gone through Innovate Smart Grant. So we had a lot of sort of knowledge and, I suppose, evidence that we had something that was viable and we had a patent pending. But obviously, we haven't got into the commercialization bit. So there is a risk on both parts there. I think you have a lot of dialogue with them. I think what was so amazing about DevBank as well was that they actually met the staff as well and the team. And I think you get a different insight. You can speak to each individual person and get a different perspective. And I think that's also really important as well. But obviously, you want to showcase the opportunity and you want to keep that really exciting and alive. But people will find out anyway. So you might as well be upfront. It's worse. The story that Duncan's just shared, I think, says it all, really. Actually, I'd rather be upfront and put everything on the table than have anything come out of the woodwork. Is my advice, but yeah.
Ash, did you have anything to add to that? What would your response be?
Yeah, I think that's definitely correct. I think a board meeting shouldn't be all about presenting the sunshine and rainbows that are going on in the business. If you've got a problem, I'd like to know to see if I can help. If you're sharing too much information, I don't want to know about what Janice said to Tom at the water cooler and they're in a fight or whatever. But if there is a fundamental problem with the business that's going to impact the forecast and the investment thesis, you should be clear and transparent with your investors, particularly if you think you're going to be requiring follow-on funding, because then appropriate discussions need to happen within the organisation to line that up for you.
Brilliant, thank you. Sorry,
can I just be completely open? I mean, as you said that. The response in my head, I'm afraid it was kind of automatic, was fine. Okay, I expect to see overheads, therefore you're not going to get benefits of economies of scale in the same way, your margins aren't going to grow in the same way, you might need extra funding in order to rewrite the code so that it is scalable and addressable. That's where my mind goes when you say that. It's not, oh God, no, I don't want to do that. But if you tell me it's scalable, I invest, and then I find out that it's not, we've got a problem. Because you've lied to me.
I think Fran's got one more point to make, if that's okay.
Yeah, just to add, actually, one of the things that I've seen a lot in pitches is people overinflating their forecasts, where it just looks like that huge hockey stick, and you just have to be realistic. I think that's the biggest problem with some people raising money, is that they're not realistic with their financial plans. And, that's fine if you're going to get to 60 million next year, but you have to really know that you're going to get it. And I think we got an external FD on board. I think it was one of the best decisions that we made. Good financial modelling is absolutely crucial if you're going for investment, because you really need to back up what you're going to say you are. And otherwise, you get the money in, you're just going to have sleepless nights, I think. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. I was going to come to each of you for a top tip. Do you think you could keep it to 30 seconds? What's your top tip for founders in the room who are fundraising and scaling? Just to close off the session today. Ash, I'll come to you first.
Gosh, okay. I think don't just chase headline valuation. Look at aligning yourself with an investor that really buys into the vision that you're selling, I think is key. And really keep in mind how an investor can add value just beyond the capital, which effectively is a commodity.
Thank you. Duncan?
Investors want to do deal. You know, they want to give you money and you want to take their money. Make it as easy for us as possible, and it'll happen as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Nick?
I think don't give up. So the chances are you'll face lots of rejection. And you might get convinced by that actually your business plan is useless or you're not going to work. The reality is you talk to lots of people. The first time I went out to raise money, I submitted a business plan, sent it on an email, was asked to come in to meet this investor, my first investor that I met, VC, and then they turned me down. And I was bitterly disappointed. I couldn't believe it. And I called them. I said, why didn't I get it? He said, you need to understand you've done really well. And I'm thinking, well, I haven't done well because I haven't secured any money. He said, we get 1,000 business plans a quarter. He said, and we make 4 investments a year. So he said, the fact that we invited you in meant actually you got somewhere. So don't give up.
Thank you. Final word to you, Fran.
Yeah, I would also echo that. I mean, there is something about perseverance and grit, and you really need a lot of that. But I would also say the power of serendipity, actually, because, you know, talking to everybody, and, you know, I met my first seed investor on an aeroplane. You know, it's amazing who you can speak to, who might even know somebody else. I was introduced via contact to DevBank. So just talk to everybody about what you're doing, and you never know what will come out of it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Big thank you to the panel. They've been excellent today. And thank you all very much for coming. If you do have more questions, they'll be hanging around for about 10 minutes afterwards, so please do come and chat to us. One final request, my colleague Jess will not let you leave the room unless you scan the QR code and answer 3 questions, please. So if you don't mind just giving us a bit of feedback, that would be great. But thank you all for coming. Really great session. Thank you.